It's a question we've all asked at some point. Maybe in a quiet moment, or maybe screaming into a pillow. Why is there so much suffering in the world? It's a question that cuts across every culture, every generation. It just might be the oldest question we've ever asked. It really boils down to this, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? I mean, why do the righteous suffer while the wicked just seem to get away with everything? For thousands of years, people thought they had a pretty simple answer. And that answer was something called the retribution principle. It's this core belief that the universe is basically fair. The righteous will do well, the wicked will suffer, and it all balances out based on what you do. It's a very neat, tidy, cause and effect way of looking at the world. You see this idea baked into a lot of ancient wisdom literature. The Book of Proverbs, for instance, lays it out plain and simple. Trouble pursues the sinner, but the righteous are rewarded with good things. See? It's a clear, predictable system. You do good, you get good. You do bad, you get bad. Simple. But what happens when life doesn't follow the rules? This is where the story gets really interesting. Because this simple answer wasn't just challenged in modern times, it was being seriously questioned thousands of years ago by some of the most brilliant minds of the ancient world. So let's look at two incredible ancient case studies that tackle this problem head on. First, we have a Mesopotamian poem that scholars often call the Babylonian Job. And then, of course, we have the biblical book of Job that you're probably more familiar with. Both of them tell the story of a really good guy whose life is just completely torn apart by suffering. The Babylonian text, and you gotta forgive my pronunciation here, its real name is Ludlul nēmeqi, which means I will praise the Lord of wisdom, is about this high-ranking official. He is super devout, does everything right, and yet he's hit with this unbelievable suffering. He loses it all. Spoiler alert, he does get rescued in the end by the god Marduk. Now, this brings up a really fascinating question about timing. There's a pretty common belief out there, especially in popular culture, that the biblical book of Job is the oldest book in the Bible, written way, way back in the time of the patriarchs. But, and this is a big but, the actual timeline completely upends that idea. Ludlul nēmeqi, the Babylonian Job, was written way back around 1300 BC. But scholars place the composition of the biblical book of Job much, much later, somewhere between the 7th and 4th centuries BC. That means the Babylonian version is older by at least 600 years, maybe more. And this just highlights a key point that biblical scholars like Dr. Michael Heiser make. He says that trying to date the book of Job based on its ancient setting, that old world patriarchal vibe it has, is just not sound reasoning. Think about it. Just because a movie is set in the 1920s doesn't mean it was filmed in the 1920s. Same idea. So let's turn our attention to the biblical Job, because this is where we see one of the greatest debates in all of literature. It's the moment when that simple, clean logic of the retribution principle just completely falls apart. And this is the heart of the debate. On one side, you've got Job's friends. They're defending the old system, right? Their logic is pretty simple. Suffering has to be a punishment for some sin you committed. God's justice is a formula. But Job, sitting there in agony, pushes back hard. He insists, I am innocent, and basically argues that the whole principle just isn't working. He even goes so far as to accuse God of being unreliable. And this kind of deep, profound critique wasn't just a one-off thing. The skepticism we find in Job was part of a much bigger conversation. The book of Ecclesiastes, for example, takes this doubt and just cranks it up to a whole new level. The author of Ecclesiastes, this guy known as the teacher, just looks at the world around him and makes this devastating observation. He says, look, the same fate, death, it happens to everybody. It happens to the righteous, it happens to the wicked. So from his point of view, this whole system of cosmic justice, at least here on Earth, seems totally broken. So if the simple answers don't work, and the old logic just collapses under the weight of real life, where does that leave us? Well, this brings us to the really profound conclusion of this whole ancient debate. So, what's the big takeaway? If the universe isn't some cosmic vending machine where you put in good deeds and get out blessings, then what is true wisdom? What are we supposed to do? It turns out the conclusion isn't an answer at all. It's a complete redefinition of what wisdom even is. It's not about knowing everything. It's more about a posture, a way of being. First, we have to acknowledge our limits. We just can't possibly understand all of God's mysterious ways. Second, we submit to God's wisdom, accepting that, yeah, divine justice exists, but it operates way beyond our simple little formulas. And finally, number 3, we have to find faith inside the mystery, to learn how to trust God without demanding a neat explanation for every single bit of suffering. This whole idea is just captured so perfectly in this line. Wisdom is not an ability to answer human questions, but an ability to live with the mystery. It's all about humility and trust, especially when we're staring into the unknown. So we're left with this final thought, aren't we? In a world that is obsessed with having all the answers, with certainty, with quick fixes, maybe the deepest, truest wisdom is found in having the courage to just say, I don't know, and to live faithfully inside that mystery.